Hi, I'm Johnny Ray, and this is For Addicts from Addicts. This is also the first phase in 5R recovery. Sitting next to me is a good friend of mine. His name is Brandon McLeod. We share recovery together. We've shared service together. He's a really interesting, wonderful man. He's doing great things in the service community, and I'd like to talk to him a little bit. So Brandon, what was it like for you growing up?
Yeah, so growing up was I had a pretty good childhood. My parents got divorced when I think I was about 2 years old, and me and my mom went to live with my grandma, and she was a very big part of my life. You know, she was a Christian lady. Um, I only knew my grandma as sober, but stories that I've heard from my mom and mostly from my dad was that her and my grandpa used to like to drink a lot. I come from a long line of addicts and alcoholics on both sides of the family, and I'm not sure whether or not that's what made me an addict or an alcoholic. But that's just part of my story, you know. So I lived with my grandma growing up, and I remember my mom wasn't around as much as I'd like, you know. Bless her heart, you know, me and her have a great relationship today, but, you know, it's just one of those things that, you know, I had a lot of anger growing up. I didn't take it so well if, you know, a kid at school were to laugh at me. You know, my way of dealing with that and processing those feelings was to punch the kid, you
Right.
know.
Right.
I was sent to the principal's office a lot. You know, I remember feeling like it just not something wasn't right, you know, something wasn't right inside of me, something was missing, you know. And you know, I always did pretty good in school. I just didn't do very well at getting along with the other kids all the time, or yeah, staying out of trouble. So yeah, you know, that's kind of like how it all started. I remember when I was about 13 years old, my buddy had his 16th birthday party, and we got some beer, and I remember I had about 3 or 4 beers, and you know, I think that might have been my very first spiritual experience. I just remember feeling, you know, all those feelings that I had felt all sort of disappeared, and I just remember feeling one with everybody because you know, a big part of my story is just feeling disconnected from people. I was always really shy. You know, I didn't really know how to talk to people that well. I, you know, watch other people interact with each other, and they could always think of things to say. And I was kind of like the guy standing on the outside of the circle, just kind of nodding my head and smiling. You know, I remember I used to lie a lot to fit in with people. You know, if somebody asked me if I'd seen a movie, I would just say yeah. You know, and I don't know why. You know, I just
Yeah, I've seen
lied
it.
for no reason.
I've seen
I'd
it.
seen
Yeah, definitely. It was
I
great.
wonder how many times I'd say, yeah, I'd seen a movie that didn't exist, you know, seeing if, you know, people were seeing if I was lying or not, you know, that was
Right.
a huge liar. But,
Right.
you know, so anyways, you know, I had 3 or 4 beers, and it was amazing. Like, you know, everything was sort of pixelated looking, and I just remember feeling this sense of comfort and ease, you know. And like everything was okay. But you know, since my parents drank and did drugs, like I didn't want to go down that same road like that they did, and I didn't want to turn out like them. So I always tried really hard in school, and I resisted drugs and alcohol for the longest time, you know, until I was about 16. I started drinking, and you know, I think that was the first time I ever smoked pot. um, we went to this kegger at this place called Psychotic Gardens. I guess it's if you go down Richmond Beach and walk down the train tracks, you know, a couple miles down to the left, there's this wooded area, and there was a kegger, and you know, I smoked weed for the first time, and it was amazing. And I remember kind of floating down the train tracks on the way back to the car, and you know, I drove the guys home, and that was the first time I, you know, probably ever driving under the influence. And again, you know, I didn't really want to end up like my parents. You know, I was the first person to ever graduate from high school in my family, so
Wow.
you know,
Wow.
I wanted to be successful, and you know, I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that, you know, I had to focus hard and go to school because again, like I didn't want to end up like my parents did. So
So you say
um,
it definitely started with alcohol and marijuana.
yeah, that's
Definitely. Okay.
definitely where it started, you
Okay.
know. And it didn't, you know, I wasn't an everyday user at first, you know. It was just like maybe on weekends, you know, a couple times a year. I think sometime between 19 or yeah, 18 and 19 years old, I remember I crossed this invisible line of addiction. And, for some reason, I just had to have weed every day. Me and my cousin would hang out a lot and smoke weed. And sometimes we'd be waiting around for 4 hours, just for someone to hook us up. And if we weren't able to get any, my whole day was just ruined.
Yeah, definitely.
For some reason, I just couldn't I couldn't feel part of, and I just wasn't comfortable in my own skin. I started getting acne a lot, when I was a teenager. And
Me too. I still have it. Yeah.
Yeah, it just killed my self-confidence. And, but whenever I drank or smoked weed, like, all those bad feelings just sort of went poof and disappeared. And so, yeah, when I was in college, pretty much every day I was smoking weed, after school, and then it started before school, and then it was all the time.
Yeah.
Then I had to have it, and I started experimenting with other stuff. My cousin and our friend Eric one day were walking, and they looked over in the bushes and they found a bunch of little baggies, and in there was some coke and meth and heroin. And I think they flushed the heroin down the toilet, but they tried the coke, and then the next night they said it was cool. And so, I said, okay, let's do it. So that was the first time I ever tried coke. And it was fantastic. I was no longer shy. I could talk to people. I could talk to girls. I remember just sitting up with him and a few girls and a couple other guys, and we just talked all night. And I felt like I could really be myself, for the first time. I didn't have to lie. I didn't, and so.
Well, it sounds like that's how it starts with everybody, right? Like,
Yeah.
like what we end up being uncomfortable in our own skin. So we try to find something as an out to be able to feel better, to feel comfort. So when Brandon says, hey, it made me feel better, it was great, it was wonderful, we're not saying that the substance is actually wonderful. What we're saying is that that's what we used to make ourselves feel better. It made us comfortable talking to people. It made us comfortable with girls. It made us comfortable with our friends. It made us be comfortable with ourselves. And so that's kind of like what I'm hearing from you is like it just annulled the effects of life. It gave us a chance to numb, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Any depression or anything that I'd feel, any anxiety, whenever I used drugs, just sort of disappeared. And that experiment went so well that we started experimenting with more and more drugs, and eventually we were doing anything we could get our hands on, whether it was mushrooms, ecstasy,
right.
Acid, PCP. Tried that was crazy. But it was mostly a recreational thing, except for the weed. If I didn't have weed, my whole day was ruined, like I was saying. But that was pretty recreational. And I remember my dad telling me that it was in my genes to be an alcoholic, and so I was always afraid of that. So I never drank every day, even though I didn't know that was what made me an alcoholic. I thought I wasn't an alcoholic if I didn't drink every day.
Right.
So anyways, these experiments are going so well, or at least it seemed like that at the time. So I thought I'd try some crack one day with a friend. I remember we tried crack, and it was pretty cool. And I was hanging out with some older guys, and the guy was telling me the story about how one of his friends was beaten up and put in the hospital. And he said, we need to get the guy back that did this. And so we came up with the wonderful idea of sugaring his gas tank. And so he said, hey, I'll give you some more crack if we go and sugar this guy's gas tank. And so, I was a pretty smart kid at the time. I was in a lot of science classes. And so I came up with this pretty good formula on how to sugar this guy's tank. And we went and did that, and then smoked more crack. And I think that was the first time I had ever really dabbled in any sort of crime for drugs, but at the time it seemed like, a great idea at the time,
It always does.
It always does. I was starting to come down, and I wanted more of that, and all I had to do was just sugar somebody's gas tank, and it seemed like for a good cause,
Right.
So, that was kind of like the beginning of my life of crime. I started doing crack more and more often, and started doing more and more crime. For a while there, we were driving around stealing firewood, and we would trade that, to some dealers, and it ended up just starting consuming more and more of my life. And, I was having a more and more difficult time functioning. If I wasn't smoking crack, it was meth, and, or drinking, all night, and waking up feeling just awful, and waking up, going to work, feeling a little bit better about 4 or 5 o'clock, and I'd do it all over again. And, there was many mornings where I'd wake up and I'd say, never again. I will never touch any of that stuff again. But then, 3, 4, 5 o'clock would roll around and all those bad feelings would go away, and I would completely forget about, whatever I'd said earlier, the oaths I'd taken, all the promises I made to people, those went right out the window. As soon as I started feeling better, I would just pick up again.
Do you think that was the point in your life where you started realizing that your addiction had become unmanageable?
Absolutely.
Do you feel like that's the moment in your life where you were almost using against your will?
Yeah, I didn't really fully understand what it meant to use against my will. I think when I first figured that out, I started getting in a little bit of trouble with the law from, all my adventures with crack cocaine. And I got sent to jail for the first time, and I missed a couple court dates, right? And so the judge had seen people like me before, and he said, I want you to get a drug and alcohol evaluation, even though like my crime had no connection with drugs or anything like that. He wanted me to go get a drug and alcohol evaluation. So I went to this place and I got an evaluation. I lied through my teeth, and I had the smart idea of drinking some vinegar beforehand because I heard that would flush out your system. It didn't work. I came back, tested positive for weed. I lied about everything else, and the counselor sent me to a year of outpatient treatment. And I remember calling him up screaming. I was like, "A year, a fucking year? Are you fucking kidding me?" And so, anyways, I didn't go along with that. I went back to court the next time, and they gave me another chance to get another evaluation. And so I went and got another evaluation.
Wait, so they were a year for what? They wanted to give you a year of what?
A year of outpatient treatment.
Wow.
And so,
just like that, bam, a year.
Yeah, so that's when things started to become unmanageable. Now, on my second evaluation, something changed. I told the truth about my drinking, and of course, I didn't know what it meant to be an alcoholic. And the guy was really good at his job, and he asked me some questions if I had ever drank more than I had intended to, or, basically, asking me questions about loss of control. Of course,
counselor questions, right?
Yeah.
Therapist questions, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I thought, what an alcoholic was meant you drank every day. And anyways, I came back with a new diagnosis this time. It was, marijuana addiction, because I couldn't quit. And that's the second part of the thing I'm trying to say is I knew about the evaluation, and yet I could not quit smoking weed for 30 days. I couldn't even quit for a day or two. And so when I went there this time, I was a little more humble, and I said, obviously I know I have a problem with this. I wanted to take care of my legal stuff, and so I was totally honest about that, and I was honest about the drinking. I left all the other drugs out, and I had a new evaluation, and it said, addicted to marijuana and alcoholic, binge type. And that was the first time I'd ever been labeled an alcoholic, and I was really taken aback by that. And so I told all my friends and family, and they
especially
were
after
on my
what
side.
your father said about it was in your future to be an alcoholic, and then you hear it for the first time. I can't imagine what your brain registered or how it handled
I was like, no, I am not. And so that was the first time I'd ever been sent to AA. So I go to outpatient, and I went to AA, and I spilled my guts the very first time, and they gave me a big book, and they told me not to share anything too personal at meetings. Of course, I didn't know that I was brand new. And, so I kept going back, because I've always been kind of, at least somewhat responsible. So, if I've got something put in front of me, I try to see it to completion. And so I went to all my meetings, and, I heard people's stories, and I heard them identify, and I just looked at all the differences. I would be like, okay, this guy's an idiot. I've never had a DUI, so I can't be alcoholic. And this person was talking about how they blacked out every time, and I never really was a blackout drinker, so I can't be alcoholic. And I just looked at all the things that I heard all their war stories, and it just made me feel separate, from them, until eventually one day I did hear my story, and I started to take a few things in, and I considered the fact that maybe I was alcoholic, because I was not able to control the amount of, once I started, and I wasn't able to stop entirely on my own. And so, okay, so maybe I am alcoholic, but I still wasn't ready to give up. I was only 26 at the time, and I was just getting started. So I quit smoking weed for a year. I went to all my meetings. I didn't stay sober for that whole year. I'd get maybe 5 or 6 days at a time. I just made sure that I didn't drink before the days that I went to IOP or, phase 2 or phase 3.
Skating by, right? Just doing what?
By,
yeah,
doing whatever. And, gosh, if I would have gotten clean and sober at that time, my life would have taken a whole different, trajectory. But
yeah.
I didn't really have a first step experience. I didn't really feel powerless. I thought that I could quit if I wanted to, but I didn't want to at the time, and I was very stubborn about it. And, nothing was going to get in the way between me and my drugs and my alcohol. That was how I had fun. That was all I really knew how to do to stop the way that I felt,
And you're referring to the first step in a 12-step program, right?
Yeah, the first step in the 12-step program, it says that we're powerless over alcohol or our addiction, that our lives have become unmanageable. I was maybe willing to admit that my life was a little unmanageable, but I was not sold on the idea of powerlessness. I thought that, good amount of willpower. All you guys maybe don't have the willpower to stop, but I do,
Right. Oh, yeah.
I'm smart. I'm smarter than all of you.
We're different and better than
yeah.
everybody else. You
Absolutely.
guys don't know my story.
Yeah, you people are crazy. I've got a future ahead. I'm smart,
Yeah.
I have willpower. I'm sorry you guys don't.
Right.
But,
Work on yourselves. I'll work on myself.
Yeah, you guys are blackout drinkers, and so you guys get DUIs. I don't, so I couldn't be anything like you. And that was the idea that I had. I was, how I approached it. And as soon as I got out of outpatient, I smoked weed the very first day again. And it wasn't long before I was back using hard drugs, more frequently and drinking. And yeah, I was, in my first career, I did about 10 years working as a caregiver, working with other people, and I really enjoyed it. It was really spiritual. That was probably my second really spiritual, experience, was being a caregiver, working with hospice patients, and, I really loved it. But after my grandma died, I sort of lost my passion for that, and I decided to switch careers. I gave that 10 years, and I was going to school to become a nurse, and I lost my passion, so I knew it was time to make a change. So I got into pest control. I loved that. And one of my coworkers was smoking heroin on foil in the truck and wanted me to do it with him. And so I said, yeah, I think maybe I'll give that a try. I just gotten out of a long relationship, and I was feeling, kind of down, and, I was down, I was down to at least try it, because I'm not an addict. I've got willpower. I can quit whenever I want. I'd quit using meth, and I'd quit using crack.
Even though the past would say otherwise.
Yeah,
right?
Even though my history would tell me otherwise.
Still got this.
Yeah, I got this. I'm in control.
Yeah.
I go to work every day. I pay my bills. I couldn't possibly be an addict or powerless. I've got a lot of power.
Right.
And so, I start using heroin, and I was a weekend warrior at first, about my first year, because I was really careful. I didn't want to get sick. I heard that if you used for 3 days in a row that you would end up getting sick, and so I made sure I didn't do that. I'd use 1 or 2 days, or if I used 3 days in a row, I'd have Suboxone for the next day just in case, and that's how things went for my first year. And after the first year, I ended up getting I was hanging out with this girl every day. She was staying over at my place, and so I started using every day, because I really liked her, and eventually I got sick for the first time, and so I thought I better do something about this. I better make a change. It wasn't long before I'd spent through my whole bank account, and yeah, it was just becoming like an everyday thing. I was having to smoke before work. Things were getting really, really out of hand. I remember my eyes were really pinned one day, but my pupils were really, really small. And so I had this idea that if I did a little meth, it would make my pupils get a little bit bigger. And I would
let's counter it with another substance.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Why not?
Made
Why
sense
not?
at the time. I remember I did the heroin and I did the meth, and at the end of it, I just felt like I was normal, or sober. And I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like I did all this. I spent all this money to do all these drugs just to feel like I was normal." You know, and
Let's
that's
go to
what
one side and then the other side, because there's no way that doesn't balance out, right?
Right, yeah. You take one and then you take the other and it'll balance out. Well, so I ended up getting cross-addicted to both.
Right.
And it got to the point where in the morning I needed the heroin just to feel right, you know, just trying to get right, you know, so I could go to work. And then I needed the meth so I wasn't getting so sleepy, and things just got way out of hand, you know. It got to the point where I wasn't able to wake up for work in the morning. I was starting to get in trouble at work more. After work, you know, to support my habit, I, you know, was involved in a theft ring and, you know, doing returns and shoplifting from stores and driving people around to do that. And that's pretty much, you know, I had a double life, you know. At work, I went to work and, you know, I acted one way, and then you know, after work, I had this whole secret life that, you know, nobody even knew about. None of my friends or close family members. I mean, they might have had their suspicions, but, you know, I started becoming more and more distant, and I started getting more and more and more into the drug culture. And
would you say different masks? So we hear that a lot in recovery.
Masks,
we would put on our different masks,
Yeah.
you know, or the people that we see in this light, we would put a mask on for that, and the people we'd see in this light, we put on a mask for that.
Yeah.
Never not knowing who we really are inside, because we
Yeah.
don't know who we are. That's where the masks are constantly being put on, right?
Yeah. I had all these different stage characters, you know. You know, there was me, the pest control guy. There was me, the Christian guy. There was me, the family member, the friend, and then there was me, the addict that, you know, went around stealing and threatening people. And, you know, it was absolutely crazy. You know, eventually I got to the point where, you know, I couldn't hold down a job anymore just because I wasn't able to get up in the morning. I'd end up sleeping through my alarm. You know, instead of getting up at 8 in the morning.
Sleeping through or being comatose.
Being comatose, exactly. Yeah, I was absolutely comatose. And
what alarm?
yeah, exactly. I'd wake up, you know, 7 hours after I was supposed to be up, and it just got completely out of control. And so I tried going to treatment, and this is about 2016. I went to inpatient for my first time, and it was the first time in my life that I'd ever was able to put some sober days together. You know, I was sober for about 33 days, and I thought that I was going to start my life over. You know, I was going to be good. You know, I remember leaving treatment saying, I got this, and all the counselors just kind of looked at each other like, uh-oh, because I didn't have anything. I did not have shit. You know, I got out of treatment, and within about 5 hours, I was using again.
Yeah.
You know, I remember thinking like, you know, I had no thought or no intention of using, and I honestly can say that, you know, when I left treatment, I was going to be starting my life over again and getting back into my career, and something happened. I hit some strange mental blank spot, and I ended up using, and
wow.
So I thought you know, right, wasn't working. I should have went to a meeting.
Right.
You know,
well, I have a quick. I'm not trying to interrupt. We got jail.
Yeah.
We got treatment.
Yep.
We got detox.
Yeah.
What was the final thing? What was the final moment in your life that made you go, you know what, I'm done with this?
Yeah. So, so I got out of treatment, and I thought I'd do a geographic relocation. So I moved out to Missouri, and, you know, I thought that was a problem. I thought if I could just get away from the heroin and the meth, I'd be fine. Well, one thing I found out in Missouri was wherever I go, that's where I was, you know, surprising. And so I started drinking and smoking weed out there, and it wasn't long before I was looking for heroin out in Missouri. You know, I don't know if anybody watching can relate to searching for heroin in a faraway land. It's a very strange experience. People look at you like, what? Heroin? Are you kidding me? Like, yeah, I just, you know, I just want some heroin. Like, what's a big deal?
Gallon of milk. Heroin.
Yeah.
That's not a thing you sell here at the store? You don't sell it right here?
You know, at this point in my life, I wasn't trying to party anymore. I was just trying to get right. You know, I just wanted to feel okay. You know, I just, you know, whatever it was, you know, we want to call it the spiritual void, the spiritual malady. You know, I just wasn't comfortable in my own skin. You know, I just wasn't okay just being me.
So when did it click? When was the moment that you remember that you were like, I'm done?
Yeah, so I came back from Missouri to deal with some legal stuff that had ended up catching up with me. and I started a cycle of going to jail for a few days, getting out, going to jail, catching a new paraphernalia charge or something, getting out, being in jail, swearing off forever. I'd be talking to the other guys in the medical housing, about how we just got to be done with this, and I would leave and I would use. And so, I got tired of that, and I just wanted, a new life for myself. When my grandma was dying, she told me that all she wanted was just for me to get clean. She didn't even really want me around. And yeah, it hurt. And, I could see all the pain that I was causing. And, people in my immediate family and my close friends, they were actually really, really worried about me. And so I checked myself into detox one last time, and I got into a sober house, and, that was it. I was done. I remember leaving the house one day to go get a pack of cigarettes. I was going to meetings and stuff like that, but
so it sounded like you started by deciding to follow through with the recovery program.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to meetings, and I really thought I was gonna be able to do it. And I remember leaving the house for a pack of cigarettes, and again I had another strange mental blank spot and got loaded. Went back to jail, got out of jail, with another firm resolution that I was going to really do it this time, and got loaded again, and I think the thing is that I hadn't fully surrendered yet,
Right.
I thought that I could do a marijuana maintenance program and still stay clean. Wasn't able to. I thought that I could go back to just drinking on the weekends like a normal person. Wasn't able to. So I had to concede to my innermost self that I really was an addict, and that I really needed to do not just going to meetings and drinking the coffee is not enough for a guy like me.
Definitely.
I had to really jump in and really surrender, and really try to, got together with another addict and tried to work a program of recovery. And since then I've been able to have some success,
Okay, and I want to know now, what does that look like? Because now we've heard this amazing, awesome story, of struggle and trial and tribulation. What does your recovery look like now? Explain all the stuff that you do. I mean, I know you do panels with me at detox facilities.
Yeah, right.
I know you've done church programs like
Yeah.
I've done. I know you do meetings. I know you help people with recovery. So explain to me like how your life has turned around right now.
Yeah, so recovery it was not what I thought it was going to be. I'll put it that way. I figured about a month after getting clean, I would be in the best career of my life, driving a Jaguar and,
Right.
having a nice wife. And, I just thought that I'd have it all figured out in a month, and that just wasn't my experience, But I'll say this, recovery is far greater than anything that I ever could have imagined, One thing I know is that whatever God has planned for me is far greater than anything I could ever plan for myself.
Amen.
We burn up so much energy and stuff worrying and trying to fit every little piece of our life and control every little piece of our life, and so now I just, pray every morning and ask God what the next thing for me to do is. And, I have a bunch of appointments set up, and I just try to show up to the next thing that I need to do. So what recovery looks like for me is, getting into literature, working with a sponsor, doing the steps, going to meetings, and having a lot of fun, going to work, walking a lot. I was walking a lot in early recovery and taking the bus everywhere, and I'm happier now than I've ever been. I don't know if I ever had been truly happy and content in my life, to just be okay with myself and my skin, not needing to take anything to try to fit in or feel better. It's the most fantastic thing. It's something that everybody should try.
Would you recommend doing anything possible for somebody to get clean? Would you recommend not just sticking to one program or one fellowship? Would you recommend doing whatever it takes to get yourself clean?
Absolutely. I like to hit my disease from every different angle. So, I'm a membership of you know, I'm a member of a lot of different 12-step fellowships. You know, I like to do the steps. You know, I like to see how each one does their steps, and that's the only, for me, that's the only thing I've ever found that I've ever had any success. I never was able to put any time together until I fully surrendered to the fact that I'm an addict and that I needed to work the steps and really get in the middle of this thing and do, you know, so I took every suggestion that I'd ever heard, you know, because I didn't know which ones worked and which ones didn't. And, you know, so I just kind of put together everything that I've learned over the years and try to put it all together into a program. And then, you know, I went from working my program to working just the program as it's lined out, and it's been amazing, you know.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's the most freeing thing that I've ever been able to do. You know, spirituality, I want to say, is not this far away place. You know, it's not like a monk sitting on top of a mountaintop. You know, it might be that, but spirituality is between me and you.
Definitely.
You know, God exists in the space between me and you. So this is spirituality to me. Spirituality is getting together with another addict and really bonding with them, and, you know, going through step work with them and sharing with them and being open and vulnerable. You know, that's spirituality to me. Spirituality is reaching out my hand to the newcomer, you know, and even though I've only been clean a couple of days, you know, they maybe can't even get a clean date, you know. Yeah. I remember when
How long have you been clean right now?
Coming up on 9 months.
Nice. Very good.
Yeah. It's longer than I've ever been clean my whole adult life put together. And yeah, that's just the crazy thing about it, you know. I remember when I first came around, the idea of getting a 30-day coin or key tag, it just seemed so impossible that it was like a fucking joke, you know. I remember they told me, like, you know, just give yourself 90 days and you'll feel a lot better. And if you don't feel better after 90 days, give yourself 180. And it was just a fucking joke, you know? Like, there was no way I was staying clean for 90 days. Yeah. I couldn't even stay clean for 90 hours.
Seems unfathomable. In the
90 minutes was like a tough one, you know? So, so, you know, I had to fully surrender and just take every suggestion that I'd ever heard, you know, just to even be able to put 9 days together. And, you know, I was able to white knuckle those early parts of early recovery, and, you know, once I started working more and more steps, I just became more and more free, you know. And so I want to try everything that recovery has to offer, you know. If somebody, you know, if somebody's doing something and that's helping them stay clean, you know, I think it's ultimately a good thing. You know, recovery is going to look a little different for everybody, and, you know, some people may be able to stay clean just by going to meetings and drinking coffee, but, you know, I never found any, like, sobriety and just, you know, drinking the coffee. You know, for me, I had to really do the work. But for me, it's fun. You know, I've always been a guy that's loved reading and reading nonfiction, so, you know, reading the recovery literature is like, you know, to me, it's fun. You know, sitting down with another addict and going through the book and through the steps, to me, is really fun. And it's really freeing, you know. When you hear the steps, it doesn't sound like they're gonna work, you know.
Right.
It doesn't make sense.
Very repetitive, and sometimes.
Right. But it's language.
Cliche at times, but after you do it, then you're like, wow, this is an amazing experience. So what I've gotten from this is that this is a story of trial and tribulation. This is a story of starting over and starting over and starting over, right? Yeah. And I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful for his story because, again, as he's telling it, we're getting to experience it with him. And that's, if had his story not taken place in the way it had, Brandon and I would never have been able to meet. Right. And I'm thankful for him because he helps me with my recovery as much as hopefully I help you with yours.
Absolutely.
You know, him and I doing service together has been an amazing experience. Yeah. And what it's ended up happening is it's a ripple effect. We're ended up helping many people. We're trying to do as much as we possibly can, and it's ultimately God working through us and working through our stories to be able to turn around and help people.
Right.
And so with that being said, I just want to say thank you, Brandon, for your testimony. Thank you for your story.
Yeah.
And if you're interested in hearing more or you want to know more about this, you can subscribe on the bottom. You can comment on the bottom. Let us know if you want to do a testimony. That would be awesome. And really what it comes down to is raw, unedited, unprepared. These are stories of real addicts, real people who struggle, real people who have struggled, real people who now live a life of service and wanting to help the next addict. So I'm Johnny Ray. This is Brandon McLeod. This is For Addicts from Addicts, the first phase in 5-hour recovery. So thank you very much, and take care.
All right, thank you.